Carlos Alcaraz closed out 2025 without a single pause, without a moment of retreat, and without the luxury of the off-season rest that most of the tour clings to the second the calendar ends. While the majority of players disappeared into vacations, light commitments, and weeks of disconnecting from the pressure cooker of the ATP circuit, the World No.1 quietly confirmed something the tennis world had already begun to suspect. His preseason doesn't begin or end. It simply exists, constant, relentless, always alive. That is the core difference between Alcaraz and everyone else. Season or no season, ranking pressure or not, travel fatigue or not, his obsession with evolving is permanent. And so, while others switched off, he kept moving. He kept training, traveling, competing, adjusting, sharpening, and preparing for a 2026 season that he believes can redefine the sport once again. With matches arranged against Frances Tiafoe and Joao Fonseca in the United States, and with his focus locked on the crown he still doesn't own, the Australian Open, Alcaraz shocked fans once more with a new announcement. He would add another stop to his already brutal preparation schedule, an exhibition match on January 10th in Seoul, and not against any rival, but against Jannik Sinner, his great counterpart, his truest measuring tool, the one opponent who forces Carlos to expose every layer of his game. But the real surprise wasn't the match itself. It was the explanation behind it. Alcaraz made it clear that he isn't traveling for spectacle, marketing, or easy rhythm. He's doing it for something deeper, something almost scientific. He wants to test himself in new environments, place himself under unfamiliar stimulus, challenge his body in conditions he cannot simulate in practice, and force his concentration into survival mode. He wants discomfort. He wants pressure. He wants unknown sensations, because he believes they are the foundation of elite adaptation. That is the key to this entire story. Carlos Alcaraz does not play just to play. Carlos Alcaraz plays to grow. And understanding that is essential to understanding why Seoul matters so much. To grasp why Alcaraz accepts an exhibition far from home, in a country he has never competed in, just days before the Australian Open, you must understand his philosophy. While many players carefully shape their calendars to reduce risk, avoid travel stress, and conserve energy, Alcaraz chooses the opposite. He embraces risk. He chases tension. He pushes his own limits before anyone else can push them for him. In his interview with Tennis Korea, he revealed his reasoning with surprising simplicity. Playing in a new environment helps me a lot in my preparation. Most people would let that sentence slide. But hidden inside is the entire blueprint of how he prepares for a Grand Slam. Alcaraz wants different noise, different climate, different sensations, different pressure. He wants opponents on courts where his instincts aren't comfortable, where he doesn't automatically read the bounce, the atmosphere, or the tempo. Because for him, every new sensation becomes a new tool, a new signal, a new lesson. The Australian Open is famously the most treacherous major for players who arrive undercooked. The heat, the balls, the late-night matches, the rhythm transitions. It shocks anyone who shows up cold. And Carlos refuses to arrive cold. He wants to arrive sharpened, exposed, battle-tested, already uncomfortable, so he won't be surprised when Melbourne hits with the force it always does. And what better test than Sinner? The opponent who has pushed him closest to his emotional and physical limit. The rival who has grown alongside him. The one player who forces him to evaluate not just where he is, but who he must become. For Alcaraz, this is not an exhibition. It is a controlled storm. A deliberate immersion into adversity. A choice to prepare like a future champion. And that choice will define everything that follows. To understand why Carlos Alcaraz embraces this type of preparation, you have to look deeper into his competitive DNA. The truth is that for him, the road to Australia does not begin when he lands in Melbourne. It begins in the chaos he chooses deliberately. While most players isolate themselves in quiet training blocks, Carlos pushes himself into real match conditions, unpredictable atmospheres, and emotional stress points that expose every weakness he still needs to fix. This is why the Seoul exhibition isn't just a stop on his schedule. It's the centerpiece of his entire preseason philosophy. Because in his mind, the more uncomfortable he feels now, the more dangerous he will be in Australia. The match against Sinner becomes the perfect test. Not because of the rivalry narrative or media hype, but because Alcaraz recognizes that no one in the world highlights his flaws as clearly as Jannik does. When Carlos faces Sinner, Every detail matters. Every half-second counts. Every decision must be perfect. Every rally becomes a micro-diagnosis of his footwork, his timing, his explosiveness, his tactical flexibility, and his mental aggression. Only he and Sinner can generate that kind of pressure for each other. That's why he wants this match. He wants the electricity. He wants the doubts. He wants the chaos. He wants the sensation of being pushed to the edge before the season even starts. In his interview, Alcaraz explained something that reveals more than it seems. He said that matches like this help him feel his body better and evaluate his physical condition before Australia. That one sentence tells you everything about his mindset. He's not chasing confidence through victories. He's chasing clarity through exposure. He wants to know, how does his body react under sudden intensity? How quickly can he activate his explosiveness after long flights? How sharp are his instincts when he is out of his comfort zone? How steady is his focus when the environment is unfamiliar? How solid is his decision-making when the points become suffocating? Only a player who understands the demands of Grand Slam success thinks this way. For Carlos, landing in Melbourne with good sensations is far more important than arriving with a perfect record. His goal is to reduce surprises. He wants to step onto Rod Laver Arena and feel like he has already lived every possible scenario. Noise, pressure, rhythm changes, heat shock, ball speed, match tension, everything. If he feels all of that before the tournament starts, then nothing catches him off guard. And this is exactly why the Seoul match is so symbolic. It is not Carlos versus Jannik. It is Carlos versus his own future. But even beyond preparation, there is something else happening under the surface. Something that reveals why this rivalry has become the new backbone of men's tennis. Alcaraz himself described it perfectly. It is almost impossible for them to surprise each other. They know each other's patterns, strengths, weaknesses, habits, reactions, and emotional tendencies. Their games have grown in parallel. Their journeys are synchronized. Their evolution is mutual. And that makes every confrontation between them a transformation. Even when it's an exhibition. Even when it doesn't count. Even when the world sees it as a warm-up. For Alcaraz, playing against Sinner is like stepping into a mirror that reflects only the truth. No illusions, no inflated confidence, no excuses. Sinner's purity as a player strips every match down to the essentials. You cannot hide your flaws. You cannot disguise your patterns. You cannot escape the consequences of every weak shot. And that is exactly what Carlos wants before the Australian Open. He wants to be tested by someone who forces him to be honest about his level. Someone who shows him the reality before the season exposes it for him. Someone who demands more than any training session or exhibition could ever demand. The Seoul match becomes a checkpoint. A measurement. A diagnosis of whether the world #1 is truly ready to chase the Grand Slam that has escaped him so far. Because Alcaraz doesn't just want to play Australia. He wants to conquer it. And he wants to arrive not as a traveler, but as a hunter. What makes the Seoul showdown even more fascinating is the broader context, because this rivalry isn't just pushing two players. It's pulling the entire sport forward. When Alcaraz and Sinner face each other, it's not just a match. It's a signal. A preview of where tennis is headed. A reminder that the era that once belonged to Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic has truly found its successors. And this is why every detail matters. Every point tells a story. Every rally unlocks another chapter of their evolution. Carlos understands this better than anyone. He knows that if he wants to dominate 2026, he must start by confronting the single player capable of matching him strike for strike, intensity for intensity, ambition for ambition. Because Sinner is not just a rival. He is the standard. Facing him days before the Australian Open is risky for most players. For Alcaraz, it's essential. He wants that pressure. He wants that weight. He wants that discomfort that only Sinner can generate. Alcaraz even said it clearly. Facing Jannik is always special because he pushes me to my limits. And that is exactly what he seeks before Melbourne. The feeling of being pushed so hard that his mind and body are forced to wake up fully. No training session can recreate that. No friendly match can replicate that. Only the real fire between these two can deliver those sensations. And Sinner delivers them every single time. Their matches are played at a speed that doesn't exist anywhere else on tour. Their rallies are constructed with a precision that feels almost futuristic. Their mental intensity is something that even veteran champions admire. In Seoul, this intensity will take place in an environment that Alcaraz has never experienced. That's part of the plan. New stadium, new audience, new climate, new energy, new pressure. Every variable unknown. Perfect conditions for growth. Because Carlos doesn't want routine. He wants volatility. He wants to arrive in Australia having survived turbulence so that nothing, absolutely nothing, can surprise him when the tournament begins. His team understands this approach perfectly. Juan Carlos Ferrero, the mastermind behind his mental evolution, has built an entire philosophy around it. Ferrero knows that comfort is the enemy of greatness. He lived it in his own career. He felt the pressure, the expectations, the physical demands, the emotional swings. And he knows that to withstand a full season as the hunted player, Alcaraz must become even stronger than he was in 2025. That requires pressure. Real pressure. Not simulated pressure. And there is no greater pressure in today's tennis than stepping across the net from Jannik Sinner. But what makes this rivalry so powerful is the mutual respect. There is no arrogance. No hostility. No bitterness. They don't need it. Their ambition is enough. Their hunger is enough. Their obsession with winning is enough. They elevate each other without needing to tear each other down. Alcaraz himself admitted something unusual for a top player. Sinner barely has weaknesses. Hearing that from the world number one is striking. It reveals the honesty with which Carlos approaches this rivalry. He doesn't downplay the Italian. He doesn't dismiss him. He understands that greatness requires acknowledging reality, not hiding from it. This honesty makes him stronger. Because when you admit the truth, you can prepare for it. He knows Sinner hits flatter, cleaner, more consistently off the baseline. He knows Sinner's backhand down the line is one of the most lethal shots in the sport. He knows Sinner's serve has improved so dramatically that breaking him now feels like solving a puzzle under pressure. He knows Sinner's mentality, calm, ice-cold, surgical, is the perfect contrast to his own intensity and explosiveness. And it is that contrast that creates the magic. When they face each other, the court becomes a laboratory. Every shot is a test. Every pattern is an experiment. Every winner is data. And Alcaraz absorbs it all. This is why he needs this match before Melbourne. Because Sinner reveals the truth. Because Sinner exposes the limits. Because Sinner forces evolution. And Carlos is not afraid of evolution. He is addicted to it. The world will watch the Seoul exhibition as a show. Carlos Alcaraz will live it as preparation, as transformation, as the final key that unlocks the player he needs to be in order to win the Australian Open. As the countdown to Melbourne tightens, Alcaraz's intentions become clearer. He isn't preparing for a tournament. He's preparing for a statement. The Australian Open is not just a missing trophy in his collection. It is the final step into a territory that only a handful of players in history have reached. Completing the career Grand Slam before turning 23 would not simply be an achievement. It would be a declaration that the new era belongs to him. And yet, Carlos knows the challenge ahead is enormous. Melbourne has a way of exposing weaknesses faster than any other major. The heat can break players. The pace of the courts can betray them. The night sessions can drown them in pressure. The early rounds can trap the unprepared. The Australian Open is a battlefield disguised as a celebration. And Alcaraz has learned enough over the last 2 seasons to know that going in undercooked is a fatal mistake. That is why this Seoul exhibition is so important. It is the last checkpoint. The final diagnostic. The final test of his body, his rhythm, his reflexes, and his ability to adjust under pressure. Winning the match is irrelevant. Feeling ready afterward is everything. Carlos wants to step into Melbourne Park with the knowledge, not the hope, that his tennis is calibrated to survive any storm the draw might throw at him. Because the truth is that Alcaraz is not chasing Australia. He is chasing dominance. And dominance requires much more than talent. It requires preparation. It requires resilience. It requires adaptation. It requires pressure. It requires rivals that challenge your limits. And Sinner is exactly that. Their rivalry may be fierce, but it is also strangely symbiotic. They need each other. They push each other higher. They sharpen each other's weapons. Their battles force evolution. Their matches shift the direction of the tour. When one improves, the other follows. When one falters, the other accelerates. Their coexistence at the top is redefining the sport. The Big Three era had rivalries defined by contrast. Federer versus Nadal, Nadal versus Djokovic, Djokovic versus Federer. The new era has a rivalry defined by parity. Alcaraz and Sinner are equals in age, ambition, explosiveness, physicality, and fearlessness. They are two players moving at frightening speed toward their ceilings, and every time they meet, the ceiling rises again. They are building something historic without even realizing it. And Seoul adds another chapter to that structure. But in this chapter, the pressure leans heavily toward Alcaraz. Sinner will enter 2026 with the calmness of someone who has already conquered Australia twice, someone who has already validated his game and his path. Alcaraz enters with the hunger of someone who still has something to prove, not to the world, but to himself. That hunger is powerful. It is dangerous. It is what fuels champions in their defining moments. And yet, hunger alone is not enough. Carlos knows it. His team knows it. His fans know it. To win in Melbourne, he will need balance, precision, patience, and the emotional distance required to navigate the chaos of a slam. The Seoul match offers him the most realistic simulation of that chaos. The noise, the tension, the unpredictability, the speed, the opponent who refuses to give anything away. It is the perfect storm disguised as a friendly. And what happens in that storm will shape what happens in Melbourne. If the match is tight, he gains clarity. If the match is physical, he gains rhythm. If the match exposes weaknesses, he gains direction. If the match gives him confidence, he gains momentum. And if the match drains him, he gains hunger. Whatever the result, Alcaraz wins something. That is the genius of his preparation. The truth is that Carlos Alcaraz is evolving into a new version of himself. One that is smarter, calmer, more strategic, and more aware of what separates a great season from a historic one. He is learning that the sport's greatest rewards belong to those who seek discomfort, not comfort. The Seoul exhibition is not an obligation. It is not a commercial event. It is not a warm-up. It is a doorway. A doorway to the version of Carlos Alcaraz that could finally lift the trophy in Melbourne. A version forged under pressure, polished by rivalry, shaped by ambition, and sharpened by the one opponent capable of matching him, Jannik Sinner. As 2026 begins, the message is clear. Carlos Alcaraz isn't just preparing for the Australian Open. He is preparing to conquer it.